Call this meeting to order. We might be 1 minute early, but I think we should get going. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone who's come here today. We don't often get such great attendance to our meetings, although I have to say around one particular issue we do tend to be getting the numbers, so perhaps we should just keep up these controversial issues and have you all in attendance. A special welcome to our three mayors, Mayor Dalton, Mayor Yule and Mayor Walker. A very special welcome to you today, and I hope you're going to attend our entire meeting, but perhaps not. So before we get going, I would like to apologise. We did notify that our meeting was going to start at 10:15. But clearly we haven't done that for many years, and some of you would have missed that notification and come at 9. So I apologise for that, but it can't be helped. And hopefully you enjoyed having a chat to each other while you were here. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. Mohi to open our meeting for us with the karakia.
Kia ora koutou. Just bow your heads, please. I hoa ka li mātou ki a koe I tēnei ata ki mana ki te hea mātou. E hui hui ki runga te tari nei. Ki te kōrero ngā mea pana ki a mātou o ngā tika hungunu whānui. A ho ko te rereke o ngā whakaaro ki tetehi, ko te tumana ko te ngā kaukatai rangi maare ki a mātou ki rungi tēnei tumomo kōro. Ai tēnei wā, ho mai takaha ki tō mātou Chairman Rex. Rātou ko ngā kai kaunihera e kōrero ana tēnei kaupapa hohonu. No rerea pākot I nei mea ka pātai ka rangi tingo I hukarai te aka ke amen.
Thank you, Mike. Now, we have no apologies. We have one from Councillor Barker's got a hospital appointment.
Thank you. I regret this, but I have a hospital appointment. I'm due to see my surgeon at 11:45 for a minor thing. It's one appointment I'm not going to break, I'm sorry.
Completely understand. We have no further apologies. Someone move to accept apologies. Councillor Bailey, Councillor Curtin, all those in favour? Aye. We don't have any notices today, do we? No notices. Now, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move into the issue, change the agenda so we get the issue which you are all here to hear about. I hope you're not going to be overtly disappointed because there is no intention for this council to make a decision one way or another on the water storage project. There are still issues which some councillors need clarifications on and some changes as we're going through. So there will be no firm decision today. So I don't want anyone to be under any illusions about that. So we will change the agenda, and there was a late item 21, which about the RWSS conditions precedent, and we will move straight to that, and then we will take item 10, which is recommendations from the Corporate and Strategic Committee, where some of these items are also discussed, and that will cover all issues around Ruataniwha water storage. So James, and we'll take our conflict of interest and some of our statutory things after we've covered those. So James, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. On the 25th of June in 2014, this Council passed a series of resolutions in relation to an investment in the Ruataniwha Water Storage Scheme. Those resolutions included a range of preconditions and conditions precedent on which the Council would need to be satisfied subject to advancing the necessary funds and proceeding with the scheme. On the 8th of July last year, the Council further considered those matters and resolved that the preconditions that had been set were satisfied, and that 3 of the 4 conditions precedent that had been set were satisfied at that point in time, subject to there being no further material changes to the proposal before the council. Then we had a local government election, and on the 16th of December last year, the council resolved to undertake a review of the Ruataniwha water storage scheme. That review was presented back to the council on the 10th of this month, and with a series of conclusions and observations, but as per the terms of reference of that review, no recommendations with respect to whether or not the scheme should proceed. I think it's worth noting that that review highlighted that there are a range of costs and benefits and risks and opportunities with proceeding with the scheme and not proceeding with the scheme, and that the council is faced with a balance of considerations that it needs to work through. Following the review, Council considered at its Corporate and Strategic Committee meeting last week some potential changes to those conditions precedent and the basis on which the Council would make a decision whether or not to invest. It's worth noting that the Council's intention to invest in the RWSS, subject to being satisfied with those conditions, remains Council policy. It was subject to the special consultative procedure under the Local Government Act, was consulted on with the community, and was subsequently included in the 2015 and 2025 long-term plan. In short, it is the Council's current policy to invest in the RWSS subject to being satisfied with the conditions precedent. Subsequent to the discussion at the Corporate and Strategic Committee last week, staff were directed to provide a further paper, which is item 21, the item before you at this point in the meeting, that proposes some further changes to those conditions precedent. They do relate principally to the question of water uptake and also in relation to the environmental management matters of the scheme. There is also a question of a declaration from the Environment Court being sought in relation to some of the ambiguities that exist in the consent conditions for the RWSS, and we have given some advice on the Council joining as a party to that declaration in this package of work. So you have a series of recommendations, and I would just note that the agenda also includes the recommendations from the Corporate and Strategic Committee, and so that they will be dealt with further in the meeting and will round out essentially the Council's final position today in relation to moving forward on the RWSS.
Thank you, James. Now, the way I want to do this is I want to take any questions that you have of James, or if you have on his paper, or if you have a question from HBRC. I see our CEO is here present, and welcome to both our directors over there and our chair in waiting. But I don't want to go on for too long because with Councillor Barker leaving, it's very important that he's here for the debate, not the debate, but the voting on each one of these issues, which is hugely important. So, any questions on the paper to James or HBRC?
Chair, with your indulgence, can I suggest that one of the requests from the Corporate and Strategic Committee last week was to receive feedback on the resolutions last week from the Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Company, as both the Chief Executive and the incoming Chair are present. It might be helpful to the Council if they heard a short set of statements from them in relation to the advice that they have provided in the last 24 hours.
I think that would be helpful. Blair, are you okay to do that? But you need to keep it succinct. Yeah, it comes in this letter.
Chair, are we able to ask Blair questions at the end of his...
Yeah, certainly, but
Yeah, sure.
Keep them succinct too. So welcome, Blair and Chris. floor is yours.
So look, in terms of keeping it brief, we wrote a letter to Council, which I believe you've received with our feedback. The headline is that we're generally comfortable with the recommendations of the Corporate and Strategic Committee as were presented last week. We do note that around the environmental matters in particular, that there's a need to ensure that condition captures the essence of the legality, the fairness, the equity, the consistency across the region, to ensure that whatever conditions are applied to the scheme have a commonality and consistency with all other consent holders across the scheme, noting that the RWSS is one consent amongst a wider catchment. So generally we're comfortable. The comments are in our letter there. One of the comments in our letter is that if there are to be any changes today, we'll need time to consider the impact of those, and we also note that any changes to conditions, including those that were presented last week, have not yet been circulated to and discussed with the investment community associated with the project or the farmer community. So there may be implications associated with any changes to the conditions precedent that impact on the viability of the scheme, and we just want to note that. We're not recommending that consultation occurs to allow the council to proceed with its decision today, unless there's a major change to what's been recommended from last week. But we will work today to try and resolve as definitive a position as possible. I am aware that there's a potential new condition and a couple of changes to be tabled today, and more than happy to try and work those through today, and have got some suggestions on how we might manage that to the satisfaction of all concerned.
Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Nothing to add at this stage.
Thanks, mate. Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just in regard to that extra, or the changes to, and it has been tabled here, and we will consider it's in front of us, and I'm not sure if you've got a copy of that or not. But
I haven't, no.
But there is a change here which talks about, it's about the environment, and the first blush of that was done, if you like, at the corporate strategic meeting last week. There's a comment in here about plan change, hang on, I'll read it. Prior to financial close, Council must be satisfied that the nutrient target set for all farmers in the catchment under Plan Change 6 and related consents, as well as other environmental outcomes required by the Board of Inquiry, can be met through practices committed to in FEMPS, and in brackets, with a reasonable number being approved to financial close, and other environmental management measures. I just had a question around the FEMPS. My understanding, and I hope you're able to answer this, is the FEMPS for the scheme from financial close, they all have to be completed, don't they, within 12 months? And water doesn't flow for another 2 or 3 years after that. And in conjunction with that, how hard would it be for a farmer to commit and write a FEMP when there was yet no certainty around water? Because a FEMP with water will be quite different to one without water, I would have thought.
A couple of key things to comment on there, and if I don't cover all the question, please bring me back to it. So you asked the question, what's in the existing consent framework? So I'll just read that out briefly. And this is a consent that's already locked into law. At least 6 calendar months prior to the first delivery of irrigation water from the scheme, the consent holder, being the RWSS, shall submit a revised irrigation environmental management plan to the HBRC Group Manager for certification that the irrigation environmental management plan provides an appropriate management framework to meet or exceed the consent conditions contained in this schedule. Unless HBRC notifies the consent holder within 20 working days that they refuse to certify the irrigation environmental management plan, it shall be implemented. The revised plan shall be updated, shall be an update of the draft plan to take account of the final form change 6, the consent conditions in this schedule and any proposed changes associated with the final design, construction and operation of the scheme. So to answer your question, 6 months prior to water being turned on, the scheme has to submit an irrigation environmental management plan for its catchment to council to be approved by council, and council at that point has the opportunity to certify or not that versus the current consent. So there is already a comprehensive gate for the scheme to get through. As I understand it, the question before the council today is how satisfied are they before they make the investment decision. So the way this current consent condition is read, it occurs post the start of construction. So one of the things for us to consider is whether there's a need to capture this doctrine here that's essentially already cast and bring forward some of that confidence for the council. So that's something I think we need to discuss today, because we've effectively got all of the words written into a consent. It's just a question of whether the council wants the scheme to demonstrate its ability to deliver on that before financial close, as I understand it. To your second point around farmers undertaking FEMPs for the scheme when the scheme hasn't even been started, all of the farmers in the region will be required to do a FEMP under Plan Change 6 from next year. So there will already be existing FEMPs in play for all farmers, whether they're inside or outside of the scheme catchment. It would be my assessment that it's quite unlikely that farmers would want to do 2 FEMPs, particularly when the scheme isn't even confirmed as proceeding. However, I can't speak on behalf of all of the farming community, but it would be unusual to ask parties to undertake some work prior to even having confirmation that they are in or outside of a scheme that actually exists.
Yeah. Peter? Short
Yes,
moving
so isn't it correct, Blair, that of the water that's contracted to date, 8.4 million cubic metres of it is for farmers who are currently taking water out of the aquifer?
That's appropriately correct, yes.
So,
approximately so.
So those farmers have got to produce FEMPs anyway, using water, and I wouldn't expect those FEMPs to be much difference whether the water's sourced from the aquifer or whether it's sourced from the dam.
That's correct.
So isn't it correct also, therefore, that we're going to see FEMPs which incorporate the use of water in any case?
Well, the council will see FEMPs from all of the whole catchment from June next year, which is the current requirement. So the question is how that's linked to any considerations around financial close. And so there are 2 separate processes in play. There's an investment decision and there's an existing requirement for all farms to have a FEMP by June next year.
Would it be, thank you, Chair. Would it be fair to say, Blair, that any discussion that you may have with the council today regarding the suggested amendment to the environment plan hasn't been discussed with the Board of HBRC?
That's correct. So the acting chair, who's with me today, and inbound chair as well, and I have discussed our position this morning. I think our intent, and I might hand over to Chris, is essentially to try and resolve this to the satisfaction of all parties today, but if we need to take it back to the board because it's complex and requires a further decision, then that's a possibility.
Just to follow
No, I think we will move along. Chris, you do want to... Alan, we do...
I have a question.
The only thing I'd say, sorry, is that the amendment that we're seeing now, we haven't...
You haven't gone to your board with, no. And that's going to be an important criteria. Alan, is it a quick one?
Oh, yes. Well, look, the condition in regard to environmental management in this paper, item 7.
That's the paper from last week or the revised one?
That's the late item, 31st of May.
Right.
Yeah, you've seen that, haven't you?
That's the one that's just been put in front of me.
Just, no. Item 7. Now, my question is,
Oh, yes, okay.
do you believe that resolution, if it's passed, is desirable necessary
Uh,
or practical?
Yes, I think the way it's worded is satisfactory for HBRC, and the board of HBRC has discussed this leading into this meeting. So the way we interpret that is that there is an existing bankable contract. It just hasn't been triggered yet. However, if something changes, then there will be a need to reconfirm.
Number 7, sorry.
I'm
We're looking at the construction
Agrees a new
contract?
condition precedent
Oh, sorry. Page 7.
for a
Oh,
further
perhaps
review
so.
of existing environmental management.
Sorry, I've been given the wrong page. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes, so that's essentially we're saying that that's workable. It's not ideal because it has, effectively there's some modelling that needs to be done, and the output from that modelling is yet to be cited. But in principle, we understand that the council wants to be satisfied that the environmental package will deliver what's required, and HBRC's intent is to work with the council to deliver on that, and we acknowledge that's a key requirement. But HBRC itself also wants to make sure that the scheme will deliver on its environmental objectives. That's a primary objective of the scheme, and HBRC sees that as such.
Okay, so you could live with this, but the other piece of paper that you've had thrust in front of you with a revised condition, you haven't really had a chance to have a look at that.
Well, no, it's only just been tabled. I was aware that there was likely to be something, but I didn't know the substance of it. My initial response to it is that tying the scheme to the requirements of the whole wider catchment on the surface would appear to be unreasonable on the scheme, because the scheme can only deliver on its own requirements, and the investment decision around investing in the scheme should pertain to what the scheme's capable of producing, not what farms outside the scheme are capable of producing. That's a different council matter to work on. So that's just one of the fishhooks I would see there. If the council's looking for a condition precedent where the scheme had to demonstrate that, demonstrate how it will deliver on its consent requirements, I think we could modify it along those lines to capture the intent of this, which is council wants some, a proof point before investing, and I think there's some scope for us to work that through. So short answer, as it's written, as was proposed, fine. As it's written here, I'd probably want to see some changes, but there's probably something to work with.
Thank you, Debbie. I want to make this last question if we can.
Again,
Debbie,
sorry.
Thank you.
Debbie had
Chair.
the floor.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair. So Blair, given that you've outlined part of the conditions within the scheme, condition 19 that you read out to us, would a more appropriate condition that could be lived with read along the lines of, prior to financial close, the scheme must demonstrate how it will meet its consent requirements to the satisfaction of council?
Something along those lines is what I was just articulating, so we'd probably need to go away quickly and have a quick look at that. We may be able to resolve that today, but
We've got to move on. Yeah, I think, thanks. I think, with all due respect, council need to make up their mind
Yes.
what they're going to do, and then come back to you, and you take it to your board and discuss it, and
Sure.
you can say that if this doesn't work, then they have to go back to the drawing board. So I do think we just do have to move on. So thanks very much for that. That was good. And sorry, councillors, that I didn't get to all your questions, but I am very conscious that we're going to lose one of our councillors and are able to vote on this really important issues. So thank you. So James, if you've got anything further, I want to move to the recommendations. And what I'd like to do is move recommendation 1, 2, 3 and 4 together. You've all had time to look at those. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Mover, Debbie will second?
No, I was prepared to move the whole lot.
No, we're not moving the whole lot. We're moving them. The recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 4 we're moving, and we have a seconder here. Do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak, Councillor Curtin? Does anyone else wish to speak? Then we'll put the motion. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Now, I want to move item 5.
Excuse me, Chair. A lot of people here don't have a copy of all of these recommendations, and I think it would be helpful if Leanne put it up on the screen so
okay.
that everyone
Leanne
can
could
see
put it
what
up on the
we're
screen, that would be
voting
good.
for or against.
Oh, right, I thought those ones go.
She's just doing it.
Item 5 is essentially moving the condition precedent from 40 million cubes to 50 million cubes. This has been discussed with HBRC. They are happy with that. We have a mover. A seconder. Do you wish to speak? Do you wish to speak? Does anyone else wish to speak? I do. I'm happy to support this because it is a move in the right direction. In my view, it's still not break even. In any normal commercial interpretation of the rule of break even, it is not. So it does not give us a return on our investment. It does not even give us a cent of a return on our investment. But I do concede it is the move in the right direction, therefore I will support it. So we'll take the vote. Unless there's any other speakers, there was none. All those in favour? Aye. Against? None. Then we'll go to item 6. Oh, can we make it a bit clearer? Us old folk. Just go item.
Being able to read them. That was the first 4. 5.
6.
Is.
We can. Okay. We have a move it and Peter comes in, does he?
Yeah, so first see whether somebody's going to do move and second and then so
Okay, do we have a mover? Move that. Councillor Bevan, do you want to second that? Do you wish to speak? Councillor Bevan.
Okay. Vote.
Wait a minute, I thought you were on terms of sector.
No, Peter is further down. This one's there's no contribution.
Oh, this one.
Yeah,
Oh, with the wrong. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Well, so you did want to speak? Sorry.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to, I agree with this proposal, but I would just like to say I very much think that it should have happened a number of years ago when it first came to the council's attention that this was going to be an issue. It should have been added as a conditions precedent then, and there should have been no further expenditure on the scheme when this came to the attention of the council and to HBRC. Thank you.
as an addition.
Oh.
So
Okay. Any further speakers?
Just briefly, Chair, just to enlighten my colleague, this was always a DOC issue.
Any further speakers? All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous.
Mr Chairman, I move item 7.
Thank you, councillor. Item 7, let's get it up so everyone can see.
Removing an amendment, I believe it's follows on the,
I'll second it, Chair, just to
Okay, we've got
just
a
to
mover and a
get the
seconder.
process right. Yeah.
And you want to move an amendment?
Well, hang on, he's allowed to speak.
Yes, speak, sorry. Alan, do you wish to speak?
The amendment can't come in until people have spoken.
Oh, thanks for your...
no, it's not,
Amendment can be moved by someone who hasn't spoken.
Okay, you're on, mate.
Well, Mr Chairman, I think we've already had a reasonable assurance from HBRC that they, as the consent holder, can live with this condition. And I actually believe that the assurance that the council or some members of the council may be looking for can be relatively easily ascertained. I mean, if we go back to the original consideration of the matter of Plan Change 6 and the associated Ruataniwha water storage scheme by the Board of Inquiry, they considered 406 submissions, 28,000 pages of evidence over 7 months. They came out with Ruataniwha consent conditions and Plan Change 6 conditions, totalling in all 200 pages, which virtually all relate to protection of the environment and mitigation issues. So I believe that's attainable. Now, if on the other hand something is introduced that makes it onerous for HBRC to achieve its objectives, sets it out on a mission impossible, then the real risk is that investors and water users, through attrition, will end up giving up, and that would be the end of the scheme, and that would be a great shame. So there's no need for anything more stringent than what is proposed here in item 7.
Thank you, Councillor.
Reserve my right, Chair.
Reserve your right. I think you can. Yes, Thomas. Amendment up.
Give people a chance to read it.
So this is a complete or, Tom. Is it? Yeah. It's a replacement. Your amendment is replacement.
It's not quite all fitting, but
How about you read it out, Tom? Is that-
Can you get it up?
This is the pain.
that was there momentarily. That's it. I need a seconder, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we have a seconder here. Can everyone read that? This is a really important issue here. We have a mover and seconder
So I'll
for an
speak.
amendment. It's actually a total replacement, really. Councillor Belford, speak.
First of all, to me, it's remarkable that we have not had a condition precedent with respect to the environment in getting to this point. The need for one was, I think, dramatically established in the review we conducted, which the staff has made clear to us in public and private communications. It's basically befuddled by the hand it's been dealt, looks upon it with some dismay, and therefore it seems important to me that we have a bit more precision and a bit more of an evidence-based approach to what might in fact constitute protection against risk from this project on the environmental side. On the financial side, we have a very specific statement of 50 million cubes being sold prior to financial close. It's something we can measure. It's something that allows us to feel somewhat reassured about the financial risk side of the equation. We have nothing similar. The language that is proposed by the staff recommendation is simply an assurance that we'll think about it and we'll work hard, and don't worry, we'll come back to you with something that we hope will satisfy you. This shifts the burden a bit off the staff, although the staff will have to do the same amount of work, but it also involves farmers who we have a FEMP process built into this scheme, which is the one place where we will actually see what farmers intend to do to reach the goals that they're obliged to reach under Plan Change 6. And it seems to me totally practical
to expect that some number of those FEMS could be in hand and reviewed prior to financial close. They all have to be in under the current requirements by May of next year in any event, as has been noted. And so it seems to me to have a bit more evidence in front of us that farmers appreciate what the environmental expectations are out of this scheme and can demonstrate more concretely what they plan to do about it is not an unfair request. To wait for that to happen until after we've built a dam and then expect this council to conclude, sorry, we're not getting the job done, don't turn the water on, is comical, frankly. We need to see this reassurance earlier than that. We need to see it before financial close, and that's what this language simply does. It says staff taking into account the whole mix of requirements in the plan, that it be P neutral, that we have DIN limits, that we have luck limits, so forth. Look through all of that, ascertain, do we have the tools at present to do that, or don't we? And whether we do or don't will be in part informed, importantly, by a subsequent decision we've made, which is to go to the Environment Court for clarification about what in fact is required under the current decisions of the Board of Inquiry and our plan change. So we're going to get some clarity out of that, which would inform this work. And so I think we've given enough latitude here, a reasonable number. We can speak to that. We can discuss that if we wish in this debate. But this gives the staff latitude to come up with something, but is clear that we want to see farmers step up. If a farmer can step up with a water user agreement in hand, I see no reason they can't step up with a FEMP in hand. They're opposite sides of the same coin. The water user agreement is establishing we have sufficient financial commitment to this. The FEMPS would establish that we have adequate environmental commitment to this project, and that's the reason for this particular language. Thank you.
Seconder, Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in this, considering this particular recommendation, it's really important to differentiate the difference between the original recommendation as written and this amendment. And I'd like to say this, Mr. Chair, that the entire dam review process, which I think was extraordinarily detailed in its development and implementation, came to a conclusion in my mind about the most critical issue that is in front of the Council and of HBRC, and that is around resolving these environmental issues. And what became very apparent to me in, if you like, initiating, instigating and supporting this process of a review was to get to that issue. We can reasonably comfortably, aside perhaps from yourself, Mr. Chair, be satisfied from the review finding that the financial, economic, seismic and all construction related issues are sufficiently covered and in hand, but this issue is not. And what really shocked me, Mr. Chair, throughout the process, and particularly from the last the Environment Committee, Corporate and Strategic Committee deliberation last week, and again repeated today by HBRC staff, is that they do not get it. They do not get the issue around the environment. Their view, expressed in their letter, and again today, is that we're only about achieving the consent conditions and consideration of the environment in relation to the dam, and water users signed up to it. Well, that's not good enough. You cannot deliver those environmental conditions and achieve the environmental outcomes that this council wants, the very essence and reason we are doing the dam, if you do not consider the broad environmental outcomes that are required. If you don't get that, you really need to sit down and think that through again, and that's a strong message to HBRC. And it became very obvious to me, as someone that had spent some time away from the issue for 3 years, that throughout the process, this crucial issue has not been really dealt with adequately by HBRC or by council. Where we've landed, and it's something, ironically, in my discussion with the farming community, that farmers get it. Farmers are introducing practices which they know have the outcomes desired, but we have not got that articulated well by HBRC. What we've had is from HBRC advisors saying, we've got this glad bag full of tricks that we're going to introduce as a part of the environmental management package, and we hope it works. Well, we don't have enough confidence around that. You need to rethink that. You need to go back, and this particular amended resolution...
Point of order, Mr Chairman. A little bit of courtesy towards our guests, and making assertions that they are saying that we hope this works is a complete
It's a debatable point,
misrepresentation. Out of order.
Mr Chair,
I'll accept that. We just need to tone.
Mr Chair, what we've had is a presentation from HBRC which details inputs that it hopes can get over the line in terms of the nutrient level management, but we do not have the level of scientific backing to support that. It's a little like saying we're off to the moon in our rocket, we've got these various parts, but we actually don't know whether we're going to get there or not. And I think we need to have this particular exercise articulated well. But there's a bigger issue, Mr Chair, and that's the lack of recognition in the earlier recommendation that, in fact, we do have and expect a catchment-wide, in fact a community-wide understanding of the environmental outcomes that are needed. That is both with scheme users and those non-scheme users. They need to be on the same page. And if we think we're going to implement just simply consents and see whether we get over the line, that's simply not going to happen. To me, the missing piece in this is an appreciation that we do need broad, widespread appreciation, understanding. We need a revolution in land management to achieve those nutrient loss mitigations that are needed. And finally, Mr Chair, one of the other extraordinary outcomes of the deliberations last week was learning that the investment of $10 million by the scheme itself in mitigation was in fact not mitigation of nutrient loss from implementation of the scheme, but some prior, if you like, arrangement whereby we, if you like, mitigate public opinion by an investment that looks like 10 million. What I'm saying, Mr Chair, is I expect out of this that HBRC, when considering this condition precedent, will go away, consider the entire catchment, consider the entire raft of environmental mitigation that needs to take place, model it scientifically and come back to council's satisfaction that we will in fact achieve those environmental outcomes that this council insists on achieving.
Thank you, Councillor. Just before we go on, two things. One, when we're giving our speeches, our dissertations, just remember that nobody's got right of reply. So if we can just take that into account when we're talking about people. Just before we come to you, Peter, this is a bit unusual, but James has asked for special. He's a new boy on the block, so I'm going to give him 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Look, if this resolution is passed, it just presents staff with some ambiguities with respect to implementing it. So I just do want to clarify two important points so we do understand what is being sought here. The term nutrient...
The resolution or the amendment?
The amendment.
The amendment.
sorry, Councillor. The term nutrient targets is a legal term that sits in Plan Change 6 in relation to the nutrient in-stream concentrations, which the Board of Inquiry was quite clear that the Council needs to meet. Plan Change 6 does not set nutrient targets for farmers. It sets land use capability leaching rates. And so what might be intended and maybe clearer for us is if that wording was satisfied that the nutrient management requirements set for farmers in the catchment under Plan Change 6, if that worked, that would certainly provide us with clarity on that matter.
That's fine.
And the second issue, Chair, is just in relation to a reasonable number of FEMPs. A reasonable number is obviously open to interpretation. It would be very helpful for staff if there was some further clarity about what's intended there, so we have a target to effectively work to.
I can speak to that. It's kind of like recognizing pornography. It seems to me there's a requirement that 1,100 FEMPs be filed by May of 2018. We've heard plenty from the staff as to how difficult, if not impossible, that's going to be. It seems to me a representative number of FEMPs would take into account different farming systems, so that we see something in the beef category, something in the dairy, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me probably there's a basic 80-20 rule that applies here, that probably there's a limited number of farmers' properties that represent the lion's share of what kind of hectares, the number of hectares that are going to be covered by the scheme. So there's a cross cut you could do of that sort. I guess I'm prepared to accept your judgment about that. I know that you wouldn't accept that a large number of FEMPs to meet this requirement be from lifestyle blocks, which is what we were initially presented to justify the concerns about this proposition. And so it seems reasonably you can target a number of these that are indicative of what kind of commitment can be made by different farmers and farming systems to meet, to satisfy our concerns.
So, Tom, are
Do you want a
you
flat
happy with
number?
that change, or do you want to leave reasonable in?
Yeah.
Reasonable, leave the reasonable.
Or change to representative.
Representative, other than
Both
reasonable?
judgments.
Reasonable.
He wants to leave reasonable in. But
So,
you're happy
Chair-
with that first change?
This one.
Am I happy with the other change?
Okay, rightio, that's the well, we had Councillor Bevan first.
Well, just given that we've jumped out of normal protocol and we've heard a little bit from James, I'd also like to clarify at this point, and maybe from HBRC and or James. So is this recommending that we are delegating the control of the Tuki catchment to HBRC for farm environmental plans?
No, that's not
So
no,
can I
we-
hear, I don't want to hear from Councillor Curtin, I'd like to hear from either our advisor, investment advisor, or our CEO.
We're in debate.
No, I think, Councillor, we are in debate and councillors have to make their mind up on this. We've had a lot of advice from James over the last 6 months. We've heard from HBRC. We're in debate. Councillor Bevan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Belford's made an interesting point and observation about the fact that it wasn't until this review process was complete that the need to have an environmental CP emerged, and it's somewhat surprising given the angst of the environmental community in Hawke's Bay that this hadn't happened sooner. So this is a positive, and what we're really being asked to do here is to choose between the two sets of wording as to which we think is the appropriate environmental condition precedent for this council to adopt. And in order to make that decision, for me, I need to apply the principle that it's environment first and dam second. And when I look at the first set of wordings that we had there that Councillor Dick spoke to, my concern there is that it talks about a review and it doesn't even mention FEMP. And yet FEMPs are critical to all of this, and what's contained in FEMPs is critical to achieving the outcomes that we require to meet as a council. And there is a real concern around this table that the water that will be available through RWSS will not be an enabler of better environmental outcomes, but it will actually exacerbate a currently degraded catchment, and we simply can't afford to allow that to happen. So we need some certainty through the fence. They're not tick box exercises. They're very serious management tools that farmers need to engage with and need to get into us, and if that happens, then there's a good chance that this dam might go ahead. But that is in farmers' hands. So I will support the amendment proposed by Councillor Belford.
Councillor Wilson, and then back to you.
I'll just very briefly, Chair, with that change, I can actually support this. I had some real reservations around nutrient targets set for all farmers when, in fact, as was clarified, we're talking about catchments. So I can actually accept the change with that wording change. One small matter, Councillor Curtin expressed a desire to go to the moon. That's the way I read it or heard it. If he comes to Wairoa, I can introduce him to Peter Beck and Rocket Lab, and I reckon we could accommodate him.
Yeah. Councillor Hewitt.
Very good. Thank you. One of the issues that's come out of this relitigation process is an attempt to be renegotiating a Board of Inquiry package, and in actual fact that's just not where we should be as councillors. As councillors, it's important that we are able to give the community confidence in the fact that we are in a position to be achieving an environmental outcomes, and we've heard from our investment company advisor from the condition 19 of the consent around ways that those environmental conditions can be managed to the satisfaction of council. So in terms of solutions, I'm confident that there is a comprehensive framework in place in terms of the Toki catchment. We've got a nitrogen a package in place that's for ecological health, and I just point out here that DIN really on its own is it's not an outcome, it is a measure, and it's if you're looking at the point 8, it's just a red herring, because if we attempt to control algae growth by managing nitrogen, we'd have to remove the vast majority of farms in the catchment. This approach would take many decades to have any effect, and it will also have a hugely detrimental effect to the Hawke's Bay economy. This will result in significant job losses and social upheaval, and it's a position that no region should take lightly. We're also looking to be managing phosphorus and fencing in streams and waterways. The farm environmental plans, management plans, are for the whole of the Toki catchment. So it's quite illogical that we're trying to tie the scheme into a responsibility for the whole catchment. And in terms of those farm environmental plans, we've got into the middle of next year to have farmers sign on. As at the last report last week, we're in excess of 200 who've signed on out of 1,100, and with another 12 months to go, I have every confidence that the community is moving in the right direction. But it's not a rock concert. It is a process that has been put in place, and has been put in place by the Board of Inquiry. We've also got minimum flows in place, so that's going to provide significant habitat protection. And if we do not have environmental flows coming out of the Ruataniwha water storage scheme, there is no way we will be achieving those minimum flows. So in terms of trying to get the hands into the gearbox with this proposal, I can't support it. I can live with the first one that was proposed, but not the amendment, because I think there's a logical flaw there, and that's in trying to achieve outcomes for the whole of the catchment as opposed to just trying to target what's happening within the scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. What the dam review highlighted for me was just how far we have to go before we can meet one of the key drivers for the scheme, and that is restoring the health of the Tuki River. It was unfortunate, to say the least, that it was agreed to hold Plan Change 6 hearings and RWS consent hearings simultaneously. To say that this decision has come back to bite us on the bum is putting it mildly. It put the Board of Inquiry in an enviable position of having to have a bob each way. Hence why I believe there is such a disconnect between the 0.8 DIN and the luck limits. And so here we are today with a review that clearly stated that with or without the dam, the DIN limit cannot be met within the stipulated timeframes. So we're offered, to my mind, two clear choices: change the DIN limit or change the luck limits. To do either will require a plan change. That, to me, is the reality of the matter. And we're all conscious of the time taken to complete a plan change. Some might argue that we should go ahead with the RWSS and worry about the plan change later. I find this argument to be short-sighted. To my mind, no rational landowner or investor would contemplate signing up to a take-or-pay contract without knowing what environmental constraints they are going to be working under. Why would they make a decision to make a major financial commitment without first knowing the rules that they will be operating under? And that's what this motion does. It forces us, as regulators, to have a much better handle on what is required to meet the DIN limit, because it is the luck limits that need to change, not the DIN limit. To my mind, the DIN limit is inviolate. If anything, it should be reduced, given that it was at the upper end of the range of measures of ecological health. And this is where being both the regulator and promoter of the scheme becomes a fuzzy area. It is vital that investors, either ratepayers or the institutional investor, know what environmental constraints the scheme's customers are going to be operating under. After all, it is the customers who will be ultimately paying the bills. But as investors, we need to be assured of our returns. We need to be assured that environmental constraints are not going to dampen the appetite of landowners to sign up for the scheme. I totally understand that the decision about return on investment is an appetite for risk. Anyone who knows me well will appreciate that I have a low appetite for risk, especially when it comes to risking other people's money. In fact, I'd go so far as to say the whole idea of ratepayers subsidising the scheme is why I'm sitting around this table today. I got a very clear message from the ratepayers of Napier that they have no appetite for this investment. It was a message that was clear for all to see. So I would have thought that instead of expending so much energy in disparaging so-called greenies, the dam supporters would have been out in the marketplace looking for investors to take the regional council's so-called investment out of the equation. So I'll be supporting this motion, as both investors and customers need to know what environmental constraints are going to be placed on the scheme, because what we have now is not going to work. If this process takes some years to complete, then that is how long it takes. But let me finish by saying, if this whole process had been managed in a far more open and transparent manner, and if we had at first considered what was required to restore the health of the tuki and then considered if the scheme had been able to operate under those constraints, we would not be in the position here today. I'd also like to mention that I will not be pressured into making a rush decision because of the way this process was managed in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barker.
Briefly, I'll support the amendment, and in doing so will quote the words of the Chair as my reason for doing so. The Chair once said at a meeting, for 150 years, the Tuki River had to live with us. In the future, we're going to have to live with the river.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no other speakers. Tom, do you want to follow?
Just briefly, to echo Councillor Bevan's comment, this is the time for us to assert that we are putting the environment first, then the dam. Secondly, to what Councillor Curtin and Bailey have said in different ways, we are asserting our regulatory role, which is what this council should be doing and should be putting first in this whole matter. And that's what this condition will help us do.
Okay, we're moving a second and we've all had our say. So be very clear, this amendment, if we agree to it, becomes the substantive resolution. So given that, all those in favour? Aye. Against? No. Do you want division? All those in favour? And against? The amendment is carried and it now becomes the substantive resolution, so we need to move that again. You guys, you're happy to move, happy to second? We don't need anyone to speak on it. I'm told you do. Just want to make sure my processes are right, Councillor Dick. Get into trouble as I do. All those in favour? Aye. Against? And we'll note those votes as well. Yes, you are excused, Councillor. Moving to 8. Okay, Councillor, so we've got through that. We'll move to Resolution 8.
I think Councillor Bevan has a additional CP to recommend before we get to 8.
No, it's after 8.
It's after 8.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm happy to move recommendation 8 with some additional words on the end of it, Chair. The additional words being as informed by the capital structure review process. So remove the crossouts you've got.
Mhm. And that, sorry?
And it should those extra words should read as informed by the capital review process. Oh, you have to remove the word considered as well? Or considered through?
Chairman, can I just clarify that the intention was to retain the words that had the cross out, not remove
Yes,
those words,
correct.
just to remove the cross out?
Retained, correct. Yes.
Everybody happy with those? Yeah. A mover and a seconder?
So, very briefly, Chair, given that we have a capital review committee that's been established and it's looking at a whole range of matters, including the capital structure of the port and so forth, it just seems sensible to me that the 6% dividend return that we are currently requiring HBRC to meet as part of the process of the build of the dam, it's sensible for that committee to have a look at this matter as part of what it's considering, Chair. So that's the reason for the extra wording.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I wonder whether the mover and seconder would consider just a slight adjustment to their resolution in going to 1, 2, 3, the fourth line down, investment in the scheme. I had assumed that the intent was return on its investments, which include both the scheme and the port. Is it your perception that we're considering just the scheme in isolation at the?
Yes.
Well, I think the review committee is considering the wider port stuff anyway, but this is specifically in relation to the RWSS.
The scheme itself.
And I think
Yes,
it should
it
stay
is.
that way.
As was consulted on, Chair.
Why I raise that, Mr. If you could allow me, Mr. Chair, why I ask that is that the return is on the investments from HBRC. This council's concern is around the returns. The 6% in the consultation document is about its investments, the entire investment portfolio.
Investment in the scheme.
Well,
Investment of up to $80 million.
I think the review committee's going to do that anyway.
okay.
Seconder, if you ever.
Oh, nothing to add.
Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a significant recommendation, and it's signalled that that we do have some issues in terms of the 6% return on investment. It's been labelled in our papers by one of our financial advisors as unorthodox, and I look forward to it being addressed, because when we looked at this this review process, we focused on some areas that were of contention, but what's been overlooked in the entire process is the bigger picture. So that socio-economic benefits have been overlooked. The regional benefits for growth through the strategic investment have been largely overlooked. The environmental benefits that are to be obtained in conjunction with the economic growth are just huge for the region, and there's been quite a focus on some smaller aspects of it, but not the wider picture, which is the enhanced flows and the opportunity for greater recreational use and health and well-being of the tuki. The social improvement through the jobs creation out of this project, I mean, whether we're looking at 2,500 or 3,500 jobs, we're looking at tremendous farm and on-farm support opportunities. So in terms of one of the things that that's come out quite nicely and timely in yesterday's newspaper is the mayoral support from some of the attendees in the room here, and I'll quote Mayor Yule: "I think this is a no-brainer." And on it goes on Mayor Dalton: "Just get on and build it. It's the one single thing that in my lifetime will be a complete game changer from the Hawke's Bay region." And Mayor Walker, it's about diversifying the way we use land, coupled with environmental management and consequently the markets we operate in. I'm well aware that Mayor Little had very favourable comments that he didn't have the opportunity to be contributing. But today's decision has been monumental, and if we go back to the one that was quietly overlooked, and that was number 2, and that was the fact that we as a council all unanimously agreed to commit to the investment in the Ruataniwha scheme as per our long-term plan. So that was a very significant motion that has been agreed by all of us universally today, and it sends a wonderful clear signal to our community and our investors. So today's decision is going to shape the future of our province for generations to come. Thank you.
Can I go first?
Thank you, Councillor Balfour.
I'm glad that Councillor Hewitt brought up the word unorthodox. What our reviewer actually said was that what he called unorthodox was council or HBRC borrowing for 22 years up to $80 million to pay the dividend back into our other pocket. That was what's unorthodox. We don't get to a point where there is sufficient money in this cash machine that we see as the dam until 22 years out from now and 100% take-up. Until then, we are borrowing money on the one hand to put it in our other pocket, on the other something Councillor Barker has called a Ponzi scheme.
Mr. Moore.
Just, Mr. Chairman, with the expectation of an applause as well. I would just like to endorse Councillor Hewitt's remarks on behalf of the Tamatea Tai Whenua, which is the Central Hawke's Bay Māori entity representing 9 marae. We thoroughly endorse this project. I'm very pleased, as she said, to see the 3 mayors, or the other 2 mayors supporting our mayor. We have been with this right from the word go. We're well aware of the environmental repercussions. In fact, we've made a deal with the HBRC that we would be not only fully supporting it, but be involved in an agreement to work right through. In my time in Central Hawke's Bay, the last 50 odd years, there's been a drain of Māoridom looking for jobs, and we just see this keeping our people at home.
Councillor Wilson, will you refrain from clapping? Any others? Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to see this consideration of our investment and assurance around the 6% return. I think is important. Sure, there are very significant economic and regional benefits to be had, but at the end of the day, we do need to protect the current asset base of council and have all ratepayers concerned that we are achieving an acceptable rate of return, and the nominated level at 6% is currently on the table. My concern is to ensure that the 6% is uncoupled from the investment return from the port. As you're aware, Mr. Chair, there are very substantial investment demands on the port and for it to expand, so we're needing as a council to take a prudent approach to that. And this gives us the opportunity to ensure that the ratepayer is getting best bangs for buck. I note and appreciate the high level of support from our regional leaders, the mayors of the respective councils, and I'm sure that they'll be the first to line up and purchase some of that loose water that we've got, and knowing that it's a really good investment. So I look forward to that outcome if indeed we're needing that investment to come from all quarters of the community.
Any more speakers? Then I will speak. I cannot believe that we are sitting here prepared to give away $80 million to an investment, and that's, for us, is an oxymoron, that for 22 years will not return us any return on our investment. I want HBRC to be a company that is an investment company for all the people of Hawke's Bay. And I get the GDP growth. I get that. But we can invest in projects that give us GDP growth and give us jobs and gives us a return on investment. That's been the capitalist model since it was invented. This is not right, to put in $80 million into a project that without any return on investment. And at least here, I mean, and I would mention, Councillor Hewitt, that without calling you a revisionist, and I would never do that, but it is certainly true what Councillor Belford said, that unorthodox was the term used in the what Councillor Barker once referred to as a Ponzi scheme. It is HBRC borrowing money off its asset base, which is essentially the Napier Port, to pay us our dividend because the investment doesn't pay a dividend. That's just a money go round as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I would ask those wonderful mayors that are here today, and here they all are, and I'd like to eyeball them. How about you stomp up the 80 million and put in 80 million and don't get a return for your ratepayers? I doubt very much that you would do that. This capital belongs to everyone in Hawke's Bay, including the people in Wairoa, the people in Hastings and the people in Central Hawke's Bay. And to invest it in one single project without getting a return is unorthodox and rightly. Now, I know how this happened, this 6% issue happened. It happened because our management realised that if they didn't get a return on investment, they'd have to up the rates. Because that's the bottom line here. You invest this money that has been getting a return on investment, albeit over the last 2 years small, just out of the banks, then you're going to have a substantial rate rise. So you're going to have to go to all the people in Hawke's Bay and increase their rates for a project which I suggest would not pass the referendum test. Now that may be a bit of a push for some of you, but that's my belief. So I will be opposing this. I don't support that HBRC should borrow money to pay the investment, and that's what they're trying to get out of here. They never agreed to this, to their credit. They never agreed. But we need to find another way. We need to find another way so that our ratepayers are not out of pocket here. So I'll be opposing this. Absolutely. Reconsider. Absolutely. I don't want to reconsider. I want to go back to the drawing board entirely and say that.
This is my right of reply. Yeah. Chair, I hear the point you make, and I'm going to propose an extra recommendation once the debate on this one's completed. But and I don't really want to exercise a right of reply here, Chair, but it's been suggested to me by Councillor Wilson that for clarity's sake we should actually add one more word to that recommendation or resolution after the word 6% to enter annual return, to clarify what that actually means. So with the seconders' indulgence, if we could do that. Yeah.
Sure, right reply. So we have a mover and a seconder. We'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Me don't need to. I don't. Do you want a division? Okay. Councillor Dick has called division, even though I'm quite happy not to have one. All those in favour, raise your right hand. Swear on the Bible. There you go. I'm the only one. All those against?
So, Chair, I'd like to move a resolution which I think will become number 9.
Yeah.
And the resolution would read, agrees to amend the condition precedent on funding to read, securing the funding required to build and operate the RWSS infrastructure on terms acceptable to the investors.
Peter, can I suggest you put on terms pre-agreed?
Pre-
On pre-agreed terms acceptable to the investors? Just the financial close, you know, we need to iron things out, not down to the last 48 hours.
Well, it might be. It might come down to that.
Well,
But at the end of the day, it's
Can we highlight that up?
pre-agreed will just give that finality.
Well, I don't know if that adds any value to it, actually. No, I'd like to stick with the existing wording, Chair.
All the investors?
So, Chair, there are 2 reasons for me.
Seconder here, Neil. So you move with Neil seconder.
There are 2 reasons for me proposing this extra resolution. The first is as a consequence of the discussion we've just had on reviewing the 6% return. That is, and who knows where that's going to finish up. But what this resolution will do is require HBRC, once the capital review process is complete and the recommendations flow from that, it will require HBRC to work closely with the regional council to test their expectations before they go into finally negotiate the financial terms of this dam if it's to proceed. So I think it's highly desirable that that absolutely is clear. The second reason for having it is for completeness. Other than the words at the end of this resolution, this was one of the original 4 conditions precedent that had not yet been met, and I think for the sake of clarity and completeness in the paper that we're dealing with, it should actually be there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly concur with the mover in this. And Mr. Chair, I'd just like to focus on the words condition precedent in that resolution. And I think it needs to be said that a condition precedent is saying, this is what it says, that we accept the proposition to proceed with the dam subject to certain conditions. We could be saying today, let's not proceed at all and kill the dam, but what we're saying is, let's proceed subject to these conditions. So that's a very clear, positive message that ought to be thought about by all concerned. In this particular resolution, we are saying, and I'm pleased to see the terms acceptable to the investors remains in, because there are significant issues to be resolved. The investors, from my observation from the review process, do have potentially differences of views about what those terms are. So we need clarity around that. What I'm picking out of all of this debate, and we're up to the last item, Mr. Chair, is that today we have tabled these conditions, and I think that in fact is a courageous thing to do from this council. What we're saying is this is still live, you come up with the answers, and we proceed. I think that's a much bigger, bolder, more courageous statement than saying this is the end of the road, and I'm very pleased that we've arrived at number 9 in this suite of recommendations.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? Debbie?
I wish to offer an amendment that we insert the words and operate the Rotana for water storage infrastructure on pre-agreed terms acceptable to the investors.
Put that in just so we can see what in there.
On pre-agreed, yeah, that's right.
We'll need a seconder for that once we see it up there. On pre-agreed terms acceptable to the investors.
I'll second it, Chair. I'm not quite sure what it adds, though, and I will second it on proviso that Councillor Hewitt can explain what she means by it.
Yeah.
So I do second.
That would be good.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And there comes a time in this project when the councillors will have to be out of the gearbox and our investment company finalises the negotiations. So if we're right there at the 11th hour, then it's going to be problematic, whereas if we've we've pre-agreed, then they can get on with the job without final councillor interference at the very last minute. So it's just a tidying up, and I didn't see it as a major, but and I agree in general with the sentiment of what Councillor Bevans proposed.
Yeah, well, I did second it, Chair, so I suppose I should speak to it.
Yeah,
more interested actually in what Councillor Curtin said, because he is right on the money. I mean, this is the most glowing endorsement for this scheme that this council has ever done. Almost unanimous support to go ahead, to continue. It is a hell of a message to send to this whole community, from Mahia Peninsula, when they're not getting blasted by the rockets, down to further south. Fantastic. And I commend my colleagues on their bravery and their courage, because this has not been taken lightly. So happy to second that amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think we're ready for our valedictory speeches yet, but Tom.
No, mine was valedictory, so
Okay, well, do we have any? This is an amendment, so we need to just vote on putting in pre-agreed in there. So, any more speakers?
Would this be my last chance to speak?
On this one, no, because it goes back to the substantive. Although it was just introduced, wasn't it? So we'll put it back to the substantive, then you can speak then if you like. Are you happy with that pre-agreed?
I think it marks Nick's.
It's.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Mott's next means happy. Great. Rightio. Okay, all those in favour then? Aye. Against? Better have a show of hands there. If it's Mott's next.
Yes, to include the word agreed.
Oh, I'll go. Yeah, I think we called for a show of hands because I thought everyone was just going to go for this, but they're not pre-agreed. I think it's Mott's next too. Show of hands. Four. Against. It is lost. Alan, did you vote? 4 all. It's lost. The chair for everyone has no longer got a casting vote. Terrible. Could have won one for the team there. Okay, so we're back to the substantive motion. Tom, do you want to speak to the substantive motion? You didn't move it. Peter moved it, didn't he? Right,
I'm speaking only because I believe it's my last chance to.
You're speaking because you need to speak.
I actually think I've been in a different meeting this morning than Councillor Fenton and Councillor O'Neill. What we've been presented here is a staff paper that told us not a single condition precedent for this project had been met. They all needed reconfirmation, amendment, or even additions. And so what our action today suggests to me is that this project is a long way from the finish line. And it's sort of semantic word games, I think, to say that we have all of this momentum that's behind a project that is yet to meet any of its conditions precedent at this stage of the game after all this time. The bar has been lifted, and it's been lifted necessarily in terms of water sales, in terms of environment conditions, in terms of the deal that must be struck with the investor. These are very substantial changes that have been made here today with regard to this project. And I don't think anybody should be under any illusion about the importance of these changes and the fact that there is some heavy lifting to be done to get this project over the bar at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I have to be in agreement with Councillor Belford. I'm surprised to hear that simply because I voted for these new conditions to be placed on the scheme, that for some reason I'm totally in favour and looking to approve it tomorrow. I find that outstanding. But because I believe what we've done today is we've sat back and we've taken a really critical look at the conditions that were set previously and gone, well, actually they were insufficient, and we need to really raise the bar in terms of what do we actually want from the outcomes from the scheme. And I'm talking about, in that respect, most of the environmental stuff with environmental issues, and that's what we've done today. We've made it much clearer as to, or hopefully what's going to happen out of the conditions precedent we set today around environmental outcomes this week. It's going to be much clearer as to how that actually happens. And I'm not too sure where that's going to lead us, but I'm really looking forward to the outcome from that review.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fenton, you led us on a bad track here. I think we need, if we can just concentrate on the resolution here, and we can make speeches at other times. Are there any other speakers on this before we go to a vote? There are none. So right reply. Holy mackerel, nearly missed you.
Thanks, Chair. Just to summarise this whole thing, Chair, this has been a difficult process. The review's been incredibly worthwhile. At the end of the day, water storage is a good idea, and I think most people around this table would support that as a concept. And the question's always been whether the RWSS is a good outcome for the principle of water storage being a good idea. Given that we have spent nearly $30 million, of which $20 million is our ratepayers' money, I think we actually owe it to ourselves to explore this a little further, see if these conditions precedent can be met. The bar has been raised, there's no question about that. But at the end of the day, this scheme sits in the hands of the people it's always sat in, which is the farmers of Hawke's Bay, of Central Hawke's Bay.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, we have a move and a second. All those in favour of the resolution 9 as is on the aye, against, it's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. That's the end of that paper. Thanks for everyone's patience and the occasional clapping. That was great. What we're going to do is we're going to move directly to the corporate and services paper, which has a bit to